I've always been the kind of person who brushes off ghost stories. They're just that, stories. I'd spent years in law enforcement, tracking down criminals, investigating murders, and even dealing with some of the worst human beings on the planet. But none of that prepared me for the strange case I was sent to last summer. It started innocently enough. A small-town sheriff called in a request for an extra pair of eyes. They'd received strange complaints from locals about the old prison that sat isolated in the mountains. The prison had been decommissioned years ago, but recently, people claimed to hear sounds coming from the abandoned building. Footsteps, whispers, the rattling of chains. Being skeptical, I agreed to take the call, mainly out of curiosity. There were no reports of any recent break-ins, and the town had been quiet. I didn't expect much more than an evening of walking through a decrepit building, checking for squatters or troublemakers. When I arrived, the first thing that struck me was the silence. The mountains were alive with the usual sounds of wildlife, but the area around the prison seemed strangely devoid of life. No birds, no rustling leaves, just dead air. The building itself was massive, dark, and looming. It had been built decades ago, a fortress of stone and iron, designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the state. I met with the local sheriff, a grizzled man named Hank who had been stationed there for years. "You'll have to excuse the condition of the place," he said, leading me inside. "We've had trouble with kids sneaking in and vandalizing, but I never believed the stories people tell about this place." I nodded, not fully convinced but still intrigued. I wasn't one for supernatural claims, but something felt off. The building had an unsettling presence. The walls felt like they were watching me. The corridors seemed to stretch longer than they should, and the chill in the air made it impossible to shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Hank handed me a flashlight and a radio, then gave me a brief tour. The prison was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and cells. Some of the doors were still locked, while others were left open, as though someone had tried to escape in a hurry. The smell of mold and decay filled the air, but it wasn't the most unnerving part. As we moved deeper into the heart of the prison, the sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. At first, I assumed it was just the wind or the settling of the building. But then Hank stopped, his hand freezing in midair. "You hear that?" he whispered, his face paling. I strained my ears. The footsteps, they were getting closer. Clomp, clomp. Heavy, deliberate steps, echoing from one of the old cells. I looked at Hank, who was now visibly shaken. "Is someone in there?" I asked, stepping forward. He didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for me to stay quiet. We both stood still, listening. The steps stopped. But then, something else happened. I could hear breathing, low, raspy breaths, as though someone was standing just on the other side of the wall. I backed away, but Hank grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand," he whispered. "There's no one here. That's not just a ghost. It's something else." At that moment, the radio crackled to life in my hand. A voice, low and distorted, came through. "Get out. They know you're here." My heart skipped a beat. The message sounded like it was coming from inside the prison itself. Before I could react, the floor beneath us creaked, and the temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath, the chill cutting through me like a knife. The walls seemed to pulse, and the distant sounds of whispering voices filled the air, voices that spoke in a language I couldn't understand. Hank's grip tightened on my arm. "We need to leave. Now." But as we turned to leave, the door to one of the cells slammed shut on its own. We jumped back, hearts racing, but the door remained solidly shut, as though something, or someone, was blocking our escape. I wasn't sure what we were dealing with at this point. The prison was no longer just an old building. It had become a living entity. The footsteps returned, faster now, like they were coming directly toward us. We had nowhere to go. The dark hallways closed in around us, and the whispers grew louder. "Come closer. We've been waiting," the voice said, this time clear enough to understand. I tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Hank was already sprinting down the hallway, but I could see it. The shadows, creeping along the walls, stretching and warping into shapes I couldn't quite make out. Suddenly, I felt it. Something cold, a presence brushing against my neck, like a breath, but not human. I turned, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the hall, a figure in an old prison uniform, its face hidden in shadow. It reached out with a hand that wasn't quite solid, like it was made of mist, and before I could react, the lights flickered and went out completely. I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic as though the prison itself was alive, feeding on my fear. When I finally made it outside, the air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. The shadows lingered behind me, but I didn't stop. I jumped into my truck and slammed the door shut, not even bothering to look at Hank as I drove away. The sheriff's station called me the next morning. Hank didn't return. No one had heard from him since that night, and the locals said they heard strange sounds coming from the prison again, faint whispers in the wind, and the sound of footsteps in the halls. I don't know what happened to Hank. I don't know what I saw that night, but I do know one thing. That prison wasn't abandoned. It was never meant to be, and whatever is down there, it's still waiting. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to forget about what happened at the prison, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadowy figure, its face obscured by the darkness, its hand reaching out like it wanted to pull me back. I thought I'd shaken off the fear, but the truth was, I couldn't escape it. Every time I heard a creak in the night or a strange sound outside my door, my mind would race back to that place, and I'd be unable to sleep. I tried reaching out to the sheriff's office to get some answers, but they didn't have much to say. Hank's disappearance was brushed off as a possible accident, though no one seemed to know where he went. The locals talked in hushed tones, whispering about things that I wasn't supposed to know. Rumors about the prison being built over something much older, something far darker than the county had ever let on. But no one was willing to go into detail. The town had been silent on the matter for years, and now, with Hank gone, it felt like there was no one left to ask. Then came the phone call. I was sitting in my office, going through old case files, when my phone rang. The caller ID was from a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. "Is this Officer Jake Winters?" a voice asked. It sounded distorted, faint, like it was coming from a long way away. "Yeah," I replied, uneasy. "I know what you saw," the voice said. "And I know you think you've escaped, but you haven't. You're marked now." I froze, my blood running cold. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "The prison never lets anyone leave. It's been waiting for someone like you." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if someone was messing with me, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Whoever it was, they knew too much. They knew exactly what I had seen. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and endless phone calls. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched. At work, people would give me strange looks, like they knew something I didn't. In the streets, I could swear I saw shadows moving just out of the corner of my eye, always just beyond reach. I began to question my own sanity. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I had seen too much. But then, one night, the dreams started. At first, they were nothing more than vague flashes, images of the prison, of long hallways and iron bars. But then, as the nights went on, the dreams became more vivid. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, as if I had just run miles in the dark. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was waiting for me in those dreams. Something that wanted to pull me back to that prison. In one dream, I was back inside, walking down the same hallways. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls seemed to close in around me. I could hear the footsteps again, growing closer and closer. But this time, I wasn't alone. There were other figures with me, shadowy, indistinct shapes that seemed to be moving just out of my sight. And then I saw it. The figure, the one I had seen that night. It was standing at the end of the hallway, its face still hidden, its hand still reaching out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't wake up. The figure moved closer, and I could hear its voice, low and raspy, like it had been waiting for me all this time. "You belong here now," it whispered. "You can never leave." I woke up gasping for air, heart pounding in my chest. I was back in my bed, but the feeling of dread hadn't left. It was still there, lingering in the air, thick and oppressive. I looked around the room, half expecting to see the figure standing in the doorway, but it was empty. I was alone, but I wasn't really alone, was I? The prison had marked me, just as the voice on the phone had said. I was part of its story now, trapped in its web. And the worst part was, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was coming for me, one way or another. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would. I went back to the prison. I didn't want to. I tried to talk myself out of it, but something inside me told me that if I didn't face it now, it would never let me go. So I packed my things, grabbed my flashlight, and drove up the winding mountain road. The closer I got, the more the air seemed to press in on me. The trees appeared to bend and twist, like they were reaching for me, urging me forward. I parked my truck near the entrance and sat there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. The prison stood before me like a dark, silent sentinel. There was no sound, no movement. It was as if the place was waiting for me to make the first move. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the gates. As I crossed the threshold of the prison's crumbling gates, a chill ran down my spine. The silence was deafening, like the whole place had been frozen in time, waiting for something. I walked carefully, my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness, but every step felt heavier than the last. It wasn't the weight of the place, though. It was something else, something that couldn't be explained. I passed the main entrance, the large iron doors hanging crookedly from their hinges. The air was stale and smelled of mildew, decay, and something darker, more sinister. Every inch of the prison seemed to carry the weight of its past, a past I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I walked deeper into the prison, moving past empty cells and dark hallways. My flashlight flickered as I turned a corner, but I barely noticed. The feeling of being watched was unbearable. It was as though the very walls of the prison were alive, breathing, waiting. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft scuffing sound behind me. It was barely audible, but it was there. My heart leapt in my chest as I spun around, my flashlight sweeping across the empty hallway. But there was nothing, just the same crumbling walls, the same abandoned cells. I was starting to lose my nerve, but something deep inside me pushed me forward. I had to know what was happening. I had to face whatever it was that had been haunting me. I reached the end of the hallway, where a heavy door led down into the lower levels of the prison. It was locked, but the rusted key was still hanging nearby, like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the cold metal, but then I turned the key and pushed the door open. The stairs leading down were steep, the air growing colder with each step. The smell of damp earth and old stone filled my nose. I could feel the walls closing in, pressing on me, but I kept moving. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I reached the bottom. It was a vast, underground chamber. The walls were lined with ancient stone, but what caught my eye was the symbol, a symbol carved into the stone floor, long faded with age. It looked almost like a rune, but it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. My eyes wandered to the far end of the room, where a large metal door stood ajar. A faint light flickered from within, and my heart skipped a beat. This was it, the place where it all began. This was the heart of the prison, the place that had been hidden away for so long. I stepped closer, but before I could reach the door, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the empty, oppressive air, heavy with something dark and ancient. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I suddenly realized just how deep I had gone. Too deep. The place was alive with something I couldn't comprehend. I didn't even think. I ran. The sound of footsteps echoed in the darkness behind me, growing louder with every step I took. They were getting closer. Whoever, or whatever, was following me was gaining ground. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The only thing that mattered was escaping. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled up the stairs, my legs weak, my mind racing. I was almost to the door when I heard the voice again. That same voice that had haunted my dreams. "You can never leave," it whispered, its voice low and menacing. I broke through the door, gasping for air, but the nightmare didn't end. The figure was there, standing at the top of the stairs, its face still hidden in the shadows. Its outstretched hand reached toward me. I bolted out of the prison, my heart hammering in my chest, the sound of footsteps still echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, throwing myself inside and slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there, away from that place. As I drove back down the mountain, the figure's voice echoed in my head. I knew I had escaped, at least for now, but something told me that this wasn't over. The prison still had a hold on me, and it wasn't done yet. I don't know how much time has passed since that night, but the nightmares haven't stopped. Every night, I close my eyes and I'm back in the prison, hearing the footsteps, feeling the cold hand on my shoulder. The figure is still there, waiting for me. The worst part? I know it's not just a dream. I know that the prison is still out there, somewhere, waiting to claim me. And I don't think I'll ever be free.